Hey guys, Frosty on the Mile here, back with part 6 and the final chapter in the Green Mile, Coffee on the Mile. And this is where we wrap everything up. So they've got Coffee back on the mile, and they think everything is in the clear. They've got it back on the mile. Paul does. They've got him in his cell, and they go to unlock, get Percy out of the restraint room. They basically shake him down, try to tell him that, don't say anything. They make the deal, whatever. And they let him out, and they think everything is good. Until Percy walks past John Coffey in his cell. And John Coffey winds up grabbing Percy, and the reason that he kept, in the last chapter, when he cured Melinda Moore's, it seemed like he didn't expel the stuff that he usually does when he heals someone. That's because he's been keeping it for a special reason. He grabbed Percy and he expelled that stuff into Percy. So he took the sickness out of the warden's wife, gave it to Percy. Well, that just blows Percy's circuits. Blows all of his circuits to get this stuff. And then Percy walks down the mile to where Wild Bill is still sleeping and unloads his gun into him and kills him in his sleep. As the book describes it, John Coffey basically uses Percy as a loaded gun, loads him up, and kills Wild Bill. The shit hit the fan on that one. So Percy gets, and Percy after that becomes basically catatonic. He never comes back to himself ever again. So Wild Bill is dead. Percy gets shipped off to Briar Ridge to spend the rest of his life in a nice little white jacket or whatever they do over there, drooling and eating the pudding. And Paul wants to know why. Well, the reason is because in a couple of chapters back, when John Coffey walked by Wild Bill's cell and Bill grabbed him, got kind of a shock. Well, the big reveal in the book is that we knew that John Coffey didn't kill the little girls. We knew that. But that's still that lingering question of who did. Well, who did kill those little girls was Wild Bill. Wild Bill had done it. And John Coffey found out. And that was his way of making it right. By taking the sickness, using Percy as the tool, and killing Wild Bill. John Coffey still gets executed. They can't get him. They can't get him off the mile. And Paul goes to have a conversation with him, and he says, and John Coffey basically tells him, listen, I'm ready. It's been a long time. I feel all the pain in the world. I can't help everybody. I'm tired of hearing and feeling how awful people are to each other. And I'm ready. And I'm ready to go. And they all know that they are executing an innocent man. But John Coffey is ready for that. And so the final execution that Paul Edgecombe takes part in goes on without a hitch. And they walk Coffey down the mile. And they put him in Old Sparky. And that's the end of that. It's kind of a tearjerker, right? It's kind of a little bit of a... It's a little sad. And then after that, Paul retires from prison. He goes to the boys' correctional facility, but that was his last execution. And that's basically the story that Paul's been writing, right? He's in Georgia Pies, and he's writing his story. And that's the story. And he gives it to his friend Elaine and to read. And she reads it. And right now, his friends have died. They tell you what happened to the people on the mile. They've all passed on, more or less. And his wife has died. Paul's wife has died in a bus crash. And Elaine comes out and tells him, I read your story, but the numbers don't add up. I mean, this happened in 1932, and you had 2 children in 1932. And it is now 1996. And how old are you, Paul? And Paul says, well, in 1932, I was 40. And so you find out that when John Coffey heals you, you don't just get healed. He imparts a little bit of his magicalness into you. You find out that Paul Edgecombe is 104 years old, and he's been granted extended life. He's outlived all of his friends. His wife has died. And he's 104 years old. And she says, how can that be? And so he takes her to go see what he's been doing. He says, I want to show you something. And they go down to the shed, and every day he goes down to the shed. And he says, I want to show you something. And he brings her there, and there's Mr. Jingles in the shed. Mr. Jingles is a ripe old 64 years old. So the mouse has lived 64 years. Might still lived 64 years. And she believes him. And that's pretty much how this story ends. Mr. Jingles dies that day. And Paul says, you know, he hopes he's not too far behind. A couple months after that incident, his friend Elaine dies. About 3 months later. And the book ends with basically Paul alone, having outlived everybody. Outlived his wife, outlived people that he worked with, outlived the mouse, outlived his friend. He's outlived everybody. And he's wrestling with this concept of, you know, when am I going to die? There's a fine line between salvation and damnation, right? And so where is Paul on the mile? And that's how the book ends, with all of that stuff being nicely wrapped up. And so we've got one more mile to go, and that's going to be my thoughts on the Green Mile.